So first of all, Arvind, thank you so much for making time today. I know that you're in the middle of a lot of things, you're juggling a lot of things. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And I watched Hostel Hudugaru Bekagiddare last week sometime, and absolutely found the camera work fascinating. And I knew that I had to speak with you. But before we get into the film, I wanted to sort of take a few steps back and ask you a little bit about how you got here. So if you could tell me a little bit about who or what inspired you to be a cinematographer, and also who your all-time favorite cinematographer is.
Thank you so much for the nice words, and I'm glad you like Hostel Hudugaru. So to answer your question, I have always been fascinated with the way movies are shot. I think one of the first movies which had an impact on me was Saving Private Ryan. The way it was shot, I don't know, something about that movie made me go and research about the way it was shot. Then I learned about the various optical tricks that are done in the movie to get the kind of imagery it had. So I think that's when I got interested into this. Then I never had a particular direction. I was interested in cinematography, but I was generally interested in filmmaking as a career. So I joined. My first film was Lucia, which was directed by Pawan Kumar. Coincidentally I was in the direction department of that movie. But even though I was an AD in that, I ended up doing most of cinematographer's assistant's job. So that's when I realized my true passion or my true interest lies in cinematography. So after Lucia, I jumped to cinematography. I assisted a lot of people across different languages in Kannada, Tamil, and Telugu. And that's when I started learning. I learned it on the go. I never went to any film school. I did not do any formal course. I learned it on the go, on the job, and I ended up shooting. That's how my journey was.
And your all-time favorite cinematographer?
There are so many. I don't have one particular favorite. I mean, each one has a style which has marked an impact, which has had an impact on me. So I would say one of my favorite cinematographers in India would be Anil Mehta, sir, because I love how his work again is constantly evolving. His style is constantly evolving. So I look up to him in a lot of ways.
All right. So coming to the film, Arvind, you're not just the cinematographer, you're also one of the co-producers on the film. So I was wondering, what was that like, sort of balancing these two jobs? And is this the first time you've done something like this?
This is the first time I've done it, and it was quite hectic, more work than I actually thought it would be. So the three of us, the director of this film, who's Nitin, and the lead actor Prajwal, and we met on the sets of Lucia. All of us were in the direction department. That's when we thought that we'd make a film together, whenever that would be. And when we heard the script, which was written by Nitin, we realized that a conventional producer might not see the potential or might not want to produce this for a lot of reasons. Because there was too much of risk involved, and it was something new which you couldn't express in words. So we decided not to pitch this to anyone because we didn't know how they would take it. And the only way out was to produce it ourselves. And we believed in the script so much that we thought, we can do it ourselves. And that's how we got into production. It was not by choice. We produced it mainly because we didn't know who else would.
I see. So, coming to the film, obviously it's fascinatingly done. And one of the first things that sort of struck me and I want to talk to you about was that, you've not just shot the film, you're also in it. And the camera is almost a character in the film. And we've seen this before, in films like, say, the Blair Witch Project or, the Cloverfield film from 2008, I think. Also, there's this Taika Waititi film called What We Do in the Shadows. And of course, there's a show called The Office. We've seen this. So with that handheld quality to the frames, a lot of crash zooms. So I was wondering, were these kinds of films and shows big inspirations for you when you were kind of thinking of references?
Yeah, all the films you mentioned is something we have watched through while doing research for the visual style of this movie. What We Do in Shadows particularly had a great impact on me. I love the way it was shot. So, but yet again, this particular movie doesn't fall into any of, even though it is found footage genre, the way it is shot, where the camera is much more chaotic compared to any of the, even though they are mockumentary or found footage, they're not as chaotic as this. So the chaos is one thing which we didn't have a reference for. So I ended up watching a lot of handheld documentaries during the World War II, which was shot mainly by soldiers. In between the action, when bullets firing around, the way they would handle the camera. So I think that played a very important role for our research as well, because this entire movie has a lot of chaos. And for a guy to be shooting amidst all the chaos, a lot of World War II documentaries helped me, make my visual choices in this movie.
Right. Okay. So, how did you prepare to shoot a film like this? I mean, how does one prepare to shoot a film like this? I mean, was there a multi-camera setup, for instance? I mean, if you could kind of walk us through that a little bit.
So after the screenplay was logged, our challenge was mainly in finalizing the artist, because there were more than 100 main characters in this movie. So our first, aim was to get the right artists, and we wanted new faces because we didn't want anyone to carry baggage of their previous characters they played. So the audition process was extensive. More than 6,000 people auditioned across Karnataka. Yeah, so this was more of rehearsals. This movie, more than the the filming part of it, we spent extensive time in doing rehearsals, because in every scene, and a lot of people don't know this, this entire movie was every scene was shot as a single shot first, and then we would shoot cuts and inserts. So almost every scene in this movie was shot as a single take shot. So there are scenes in which there are more than 100 dialogues. We had to do a lot of rehearsals to get the blocking right, to know who would be saying the next dialogue. And I had dialogues in between. I would interact as a character. Nikki, the guy who was shooting this in the movie, he would have his dialogues. Before going to shoot every scene, I would have to memorize the entire scene. I had to know the dialogue order. I had to get everything in my mind. And the panning was so, how do I say it? It was extremely critical. So when there are 100 guys talking, I had to make sure the camera lands on the guy who's going to say the next dialogue. And because for that, we did a lot of rehearsals. We would, our ideal day in shoot would start at around 6 p.m. in the evening. From 6 in the evening to 2 in the night, we would just rehearse and rehearse. And from 2 in the night to 6 in the morning, we would shoot an entire scene. So that's how our usual shoot day was.
Right. So in terms of light, in fact, I was just coming to that. I mean, the film is primarily sort of indoors and at night, right? So are there specific challenges to a setup like that, and are there advantages to shooting like that, where you're not really dealing with a lot of natural light? Yeah.
Even though it looks like a lot of natural light, it was mainly lit up, because the hostel we went to didn't have a lot of light. So there were times when we had to light up 3 floors together, because the camera would pan from one floor to another, and that took a lot of time. And this was shot during lockdown, so we didn't have access to a lot of resources. We had to do with whatever was available. We got in a lot of tubes, and we started putting up tube. We would decide where the main blocking would be and where the background would be, and we would try to contrast those lights in terms of tubes. And then we would pump in a big source from afar where we knew camera wouldn't pan. So it was a lot of R&D. We got better as we were shooting. We started off shooting half scene or one scene in a day, and as we progressed, we got better at this. I think by the end of it, we knew exactly where and how we could do it. It was a lot of work, mainly because of the constraints we had, because it was shot during the lockdown, and we had limitation in terms of resources and manpower as well. So we had to do with whatever was available, and that's how we kind of developed this visual style.
Right. Are there advantages to sort of shooting with that kind of a setup?
There are some advantages. You get more free because it's all single take. You don't care too much about individual faces. Like, for example, in contrast to Kantara, where we would make sure every artist in the frame looked good, we had to pay attention to smaller details. In this, we could just let go. We could just make sure the scene as a whole looks good and not care about any individual person's face. Or, we wouldn't care too much about skin tones. We would just light up the entire scene. So it was some freedom which we had while shooting.
Right, right. So, you mentioned this, and I want to kind of come back to that a little bit. There's a lot of chaos in the film. It kind of thrives on chaos. Lots of characters. There's a lot going on, sort of rapid movements and cuts and frantic conversations. So, I think we can safely say this does not fall within the scope of conventional Indian storytelling in any way, right? So, during the making of it, was there a fear that all of this might not work out, that people might not be able to follow what is going on?
Oh, that fear was there every single second of the film. Even the day before release, we were still apprehensive about that. We had a final test screening one day before the actual theatrical release, and even then we didn't know how people would take it, because there's definitely something like this unlike anything people have seen before, and even visually there is absolutely no grammar which we follow. There is no consistent style. The only thing we have is chaos, and we try to control the chaos as much as possible. And we were hoping that people will get pulled into the chaos, and luckily for us, people are actually like this.
Right. So, sort of talking a little bit about your other works. 777 Charlie, Kantara, and now Hostel Hudugaru, three different directors, three very different films. 777 Charlie is essentially a travel story, lots of happy day shots about this man's quest for love and how he finds it in his relationship with his dog. Kantara, again, is this very sort of rural story, lots of folkloric elements, and Hostel is this boisterous comedy set in a boys' hostel. So very different genres, very different visual languages, and yet all three have worked so well. So I was wondering, how do you adapt your personal style to these varied stories?
I've been lucky to have gotten to shoot these three widely different kind of genres, and I would say my personally what I add is I pay a lot of attention to the script. I go by the script and the mood of the line, and I pay a lot of attention to what we're shooting. I always go by the script, and I pay a lot of attention to the content more than visual style, because I understand. I was in the direction department, so I pay a lot of attention to the dialogues, the emotions, and all that. So I think that is where I add my personal touch, and that has helped me in a big way, because I would try to understand the scene first, and all my visual decisions are based upon the scene. So be it Kantara, Charlie, or Hostel Hudugaru, a strong script is what has helped me a lot.
Right, and all these three films actually have done well at a time when we were, coming out of the pandemic, and there was a lot of talk of OTTs ruling the roost and people possibly being reluctant to get back into the theaters, right? So, do you think that the visual language had a role to play in their success, or how big a role do you think the visual language had to play?
I would say more than the visual language, I think it's some content. There are some content which people like to watch alone, and there are some movies which people enjoy watching as a community. What I was saying is, after Kantara, there were a lot of people saying that, in order for films to work in theater, the scale had to be huge and visually it had to look grand. But I think Hostel proved that you don't have to make everything look visually great, because when it comes to visual, this is extremely rooted. You don't see a lot of grandeur or glossiness in this. Yet it worked. So I think more than the visual, I think content. There are some content which people love watching as a community, and I think those kind of films will definitely work in theaters.
Right. So, a slightly larger question. Of course, South cinema has done so well in the last, so many years, both nationally as well as internationally. And Kannada cinema in particular seems to have really picked up in the last few years. So I was wondering, what do you think, what sets Kannada cinema apart from the other kinds of films coming out of the South?
We have always made great films in Kannada, especially in the 70s and 80s. There were some great films in Kannada which were remade into all of the languages. We dipped down somewhere in the early 2000s because of a lot of reasons. We were trying to go after something. The language of the industry changed a little, and I think after 2010 we are back again, and we have always been great. And I think one advantage.
Sorry, how do you mean? How did it change? If you could just help me understand that.
I think in 90s and 80s, there were a lot of content-oriented movies in Kannada. Novel-based movies which were based on a lot of literature. And from 2000s, it somewhere shifted to a new age genre where it would be about underworld or the underbelly of Bangalore. And a lot of movies were there in that genre. I think that's why we lost track a little bit. And there are some great movies in that genre as well. But it became a little monotonous with a lot of new people coming into the industry. Non-filmmakers and it because of the the technological revolution or whatever. Kannada industry became very accessible for a lot of people to get in, and it was good and bad both together. But then again, now I would say the advantage Kannada industry has compared to any other South industry is we are extremely efficient, and we have always been efficient. We can make a big budget film at half the cost of any other industry, and I think that is going to give us the biggest advantage in the coming years. Um, and I think that's going to make us stand out. Because we have been working with constraints in the past few years, we know how to make bigger films in the same constraints.
Right. Finally, since you were talking about your love of direction, I want to know, do you see yourself sort of directing films anytime soon? And if yes, what kinds of films would you like to direct?
Not anytime soon, because I know what it takes to direct a movie, and I know I'm not even halfway there. So I would obviously love to direct someday. I look up to Fincher, and I think movie based in the Fincher world in Kannada would be something which I would love to direct someday. But I'm sure it would take a lot of time for me to get there.
Well, all the very best wishes for your journey in that direction. And thank you so much, Arvind.